From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. And coming up today, K-State's Chuck Rice will tell us about a new USDA-funded project that will focus on improving water and nitrogen use efficiencies in southern Great Plains cropping systems. They'll be implementing on-farm cropping trials in Kansas and Oklahoma. Also, Washburn University's Roger McEowen talks about a new court ruling that he says should have you crop irrigators full attention, and he'll explain why. Further ahead, Britton Rucker talks with K-State's Dorivar Ruiz-Diaz about the upcoming Agronomy Fall Field Day at K-State this coming Friday. And in with another Stop, Look, and Listen, K-State's Gus Vanderhoeven. All that here on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Thanks for being along with us for another Agriculture Today. It's always enthusing to share information about a new research venture out of the College of Agriculture at Kansas State University. And here's another example. K-State will be leading a multi-agency team on a project in the Great Plains region and looking at various ways of adjusting cropping systems to be more sustainable, if you will, in the region. Further explanation comes from the researcher here at K-State who will be spearheading this work. Chuck Rice is a soil scientist and a university distinguished professor here at Kansas State. Chuck, this is being supported by a 5-year, $10 million grant from the USDA. Tell us about it.
Yes, we're really excited about this project. It's USDA, but it's specifically the National Institute for Food and Agriculture, NIFA, as we affectionately call. Mm-hmm. That's the competitive funding arm for USDA. They funded 8 projects. There was 300 submissions. They narrowed it down to 100 and plus some, and then funded 8 projects. So we're happy to be one of those 8. But it's been really critical and a great group to work with. The whole idea of the project is how can we advance agriculture productivity in the Great Plains, particularly the southern Great Plains region that's rain-fed, so it's a little bit east of the irrigated Ogallala aquifer area. And the concern is that when developing the project, that this area lags in technology innovation. If you look at technology innovation in this region, Kansas ranks somewhere around 36th to 39th in the U.S. in what they call total factor productivity, but basically it's advancing output per unit of input. Oklahoma is worse than us. They're around 46 or so. And so particularly for Oklahoma, but even in Kansas, the increase in productivity has been stagnant, or technology innovation, I should say. And
therefore, productivity has been flat.
Basically. And also this region, as you know, is that it's complicated by weather extremes, from too much water this year to a couple years ago we had major drought in this region. And so we lose about 50% of the rainfall that's not taken up by the plant. It either runs off or comes off as evaporation. So it's really constrained by our weather and then what innovations are needed for advancing productivity and efficiency in this region.
Now, it's worth pointing out right here that K-State is one of the primary partners in this. There are 2 other universities as well as the USDA as direct partners, correct?
Yeah, and everybody brings something to the table. Yeah, we're the lead, K-State's the lead, but also involves Oklahoma State University as well as USDA ARS, that's the federal research arm based in El Reno, Oklahoma. We're also bringing in some expertise from University of Maryland. Their expertise is in weather forecasting, modeling, and then also some of the economic analysis of this total factor productivity.
So there really is a comprehensive component to this. But there are three basic goals that you've set as far as that productivity, including input management at a greater efficiency and so forth.
Right. So these were outlined in the call for proposals by USDA that we had to not achieve by the end of the grant, but by a certain time period that we would increase annual productivity by 2% per year. That the goal is to increase water and nutrient, and in our case, nitrogen efficiency by 50%. That's an audacious goal, because if you think of nitrogen efficiency, one of the areas I work in, we're probably about 40% efficient, 40 or 50% efficient right now with the nitrogen fertilizer inputs. So that means we have to increase it up to 60% efficiency or more. So that it's going to be a challenge. Water is the same thing. And then we also have to, the goal is to reduce environmental stresses by 20%. So that would be stress caused by weed invasions, pests, and that.
So, Chuck, conceptually and probably beyond that then, how are these going to be achieved, at least through the testing process in field? Are we looking at differing crop choices, different input application methods? What?
Right. So it's a combination of different things. One is Oklahoma State has been a leader in developing basically as a water monitoring network, and we're going to expand that into Kansas along with Oklahoma State. And so we'll set up some soil moisture networks that'll monitor soil water in real time. There'll be a complete weather station along those sites across the Great Plains or Southern Great Plains. So that will be a really critical component. And then that soil water measurements will be combined with the group out of Maryland that has forecasting, if you would say it that way, of what the weather will be like over the next 3 to 6 months, looking at probability that, well, let's say this winter is going to be a dry fall, that will make crop choices based on if it's going to be a wet or dry fall, and the same thing for the summer. So we'll set up research that will be dynamic. So we'll have, it's a wheat-based system, but it'll be looking at intensifying that wheat with sorghum, corn, summer forage crops, or winter forage or cover crop. But it'll be, some of those choices will be based on the weather forecasting. So we're going to really test our scientists and our models. We'll probably have some failures, and that's okay. But we'll say, look at the weather probabilities, and we'll make a decision on these research plots instead of planning, say if it's going to be a drier summer, next summer instead of doing double cropping, maybe we decide to do a summer forage that's a low water use crop, and so be very dynamic. The other neat thing about this, and was highlighted in the reviews of the proposal, is we're going to have a farmer-to-farmer network. We'll have at least 6 farms that will spread across the region. They'll be, well, they're more than demonstration farms. They'll be really research farms, but using farm-scale sized equipment and decision-making. So the farmer will have his or her standard practice and then an improved practice that might be more water or nitrogen efficient.
So it'll be real world.
It'll be real
conditions.
world, and we'll be instrumenting some of those sites. They'll be replicated so we can collect real world information for research purposes besides the standard research plots that we have at the different locations. We will have some set crop rotations, but we have 2 or 3 out of, say, 8 cropping systems that'll be more flexible. We'll be doing some innovative crops as well to look at water and nitrogen efficiency. So it won't be standardized. So, yes, we will be assessing all the way through to advance cropping systems.
But at the end of the day, you hope to have a sweeping idea of better ways of cropping in the Great Plains. That's the ultimate goal.
That's the goal. And the other thing I need to mention is that you mentioned research, but it is really a three-part component. It's research, education, and extension. So these farmer-to-farmer networks will have the extension component, field days. But on the education, beside the graduate student training and employment undergrads, we do have a research experience for undergraduates. We'll be recruiting and bringing in students from outside the traditional ag area, from engineering, chemistry, physics, that will spend a summer at the different institutions working on a research project. They'll be mentored by either a faculty member or a graduate student. And our experience here at K-State is that many of those students come into agriculture, go on for a graduate degree. So we get the chemistry, engineering majors and thinking, they go, wow, agriculture is exciting. Yeah. So it actually expands the workforce.
So developing new talent. It's
Yes.
always encouraging to hear that is going to happen as part of this. So you'll get started soon with this?
Very soon. Because it's wheat-based, the intent is to plant this fall. Okay. Otherwise, we lose a whole year's worth of research. So we'll be starting pretty much with the wheat-based system and then develop our crop rotations next spring.
Excellent. Well, if we may, we'll touch base with you from time to time as this 5-year project unfurls and to find out how it's going and what seems to be working in the idea of making water and nutrients go further in southern plains cropping, including a large part of Kansas and surrounding states. Chuck, congratulations to you and your team for landing this opportunity. Looking forward to hearing more about it. Many thanks.
Thanks, Eric.
He is a soil scientist at K-State, and he will be the lead of this multi-university and agency project, 5-year research effort, $10 million from the USDA's National Institute of Food and Agriculture. Again, looking at improving efficiencies and soil health in Southern Plains crop production. Chuck Rice with us on Agriculture Today. We'll be back shortly on the K-State Radio Network.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
We're back now on Agriculture Today. You'll recall very recently an announcement of the Environmental Protection Agency that Waters of the United States rule, or WOTUS, would be completely revamped upon a key decision by the EPA. Well, there's more to the Clean Water Act than just WOTUS, and in fact, a recent decision in court could be a turning point, actually, for agricultural interests. So our guest tells us now, Roger McEowen from the Washburn University School of Law. Roger, as you know, a professor of agricultural law and taxation there. Well, Roger, let's go back to the basic essence, though, of the Clean Water Act, as it was adopted several decades ago now, amazingly enough.
Yeah, back in the early 1970s, in fact, the Water Pollution Control Amendments of 1972 is what's commonly known as the Clean Water Act. So it goes way back into the early 1970s. And that's where the federal government for the first time adopted a rather aggressive stance towards the problem of water pollution. And one of the big issues for agriculture, as the Act distinguishes between point source and non-point source discharges, is that if you have a point source discharge of pollution, and again, these are all specially defined terms that I'm not going to get into the weeds on, but a point source, we'll elaborate on that just a moment, is a pipe, a ditch, a concentrated animal feeding operation. It's anywhere that pollution, as that term is defined in the Act, enters a federal jurisdictional water course, and that's what the whole WOTUS issue was over, from a discernible point. We can tell the point at which that stuff enters the federally regulable water body. So that's where we say, commonly you've got a pipe, there's a ditch, something that concentrates the water from a farm field, and it enters a water course at a defined point. That's where you have to have a federal permit under the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System to be able to discharge the water that contains those pollutants, again, as that term is defined. And you can probably understand I don't necessarily agree with the way the term is defined in the Act. Mm-hmm. It is a very particular definition, as has been elaborated on by the courts over the years. But it's that issue, point source discharges, that are subject to the Clean Water Act.
So there was a change in the Clean Water Act in 1977, you note in your article on this. This allowed an important exemption for agricultural producers. Explain that, if you would.
Yeah, this was a big deal. When you look at the legislative history on this, there were a lot of significant ag groups and ranching groups back in the 1970s that were griping about the reach of the point source discharge permit requirements under the 1972 amendments. And that resulted in the Congress amending the Clean Water Act in 1977 to exempt from the permit requirement return flows from irrigated agriculture. Those are specifically defined as not being a point source pollutant. We got a hint of what a court might do back in 1994 in an upstate New York case involving a dairy operation that went to the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. And in that case, the court said that when the Congress exempted discharges composed entirely of return flows from irrigated agriculture from the Clean Water Act, the permit requirements, it didn't intend to differentiate among return flows based on their content. Rather, what the court said was the word entirely in the statute was intended to limit that exception for irrigation return flows only to those that did not contain additional discharges from activities unrelated to crop production. Mm-hmm. Now, that was an important language in that case. It wasn't pertinent to the court's actual decision that it was deciding the issues on in that case. But we started looking at that case 25 years ago and thinking, boy, if another court grabs that language on a case that is specific to that particular issue, that could create some problems. And fast forward 25 years, and that's where we're at right now.
Well, let's talk about how that has come into question in this case. And you basically had plaintiffs that were suggesting that there were things other than agricultural runoff or other pollutants in that discharge, and therefore that particular activity could be considered a point source of pollution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. And what was involved with was the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation has a grassland bypass project out in the San Joaquin Valley in California. So this is major agricultural area, and they're claiming that was discharging polluted water that contains selenium from soil into a water of the United States by virtue of subsurface tile systems under the farmland in that California Central Valley, and therefore the farmers in that valley had to have permits to be able to do this, and it violated the Clean Water Act if they didn't have permits. And so this was a direct frontal assault on the exemption of tile drainage systems from the Clean Water Act by virtue of the exemption for return flows from irrigated water. They were claiming that the groundwater discharge from the drainage tile systems was separate from any irrigation occurring on the farms, and therefore it was not exempt.
Now, the initial court ruling basically dismissed that notion. Was that correct?
They did. The lower court said, look, any type of tile system is going to have seepage into that tile system under the farm field from roadside runoff, from adjacent properties that may not be farm properties. And if you apply a literal application to the word entirely, you're going to get an absurd result. Nobody would be exempt, the lower court said, and that can't possibly be what Congress intended when they used the word entirely. So they said, well, if a majority of the water that pumps through and is drained by that farm field drainage tile system comes from agricultural sources, then the exemption applies. Because they didn't want what they called an absurd result to issue because of a strict construction of the word entirely.
So upon that lower court ruling, the protection for agricultural irrigators in this case remained intact, but on appeal, well, things changed, right?
It certainly did when it got to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit in San Francisco, that great body of knowledge of agriculture in San Francisco. They said that the discharges that include irrigation return flows from activities that are unrelated to crop production are not exempt from the permit requirements of the Clean Water Act, because they said, well, Congress used the word entirely, and that meant entirely. And so it didn't mean majority, as the lower court had determined. And so if there's any other type of water that is draining through that tile system that's not coming from, for example, crop production activities from agriculture, then the irrigation return flow exemption is voided, and you got to have a permit.
So you note in your article that consequences could be quite dire for agriculture.
Well, it could, and this points out how careful Congress has to be in the thought process that has to go into writing statutes. They did use the word entirely. The Ninth Circuit said entirely means entirely. It doesn't mean majority. I think the lower court's probably right here that if you construe entirely strictly to mean entirely, then you don't have an exemption, and Congress intended there to be an exemption. So by construing it strictly, that would produce an absurd result. It's kind of backwards from what our normal thinking is when a court, we normally want strict construction. We hear that a lot. Of course, when we have U.S. Supreme Court justices that are up for confirmation, are you a strict constructionist, or do you view the Constitution as a living, changing, breathing document? That's the big debate there. Normally, we want strict construction. Follow what Congress said. Here, Congress used a term that, if the term is construed strictly, will produce a result that wipes out what they were trying to do. So it's backwards, and it points out how careful the drafters of legislation have to be. There has to be a lot of deliberation, a lot of thought process that goes into this. So this is a problem for anybody that irrigates crops. Now, this is a Ninth Circuit opinion, so it's only binding in Alaska, Arizona, California, Hawaii, Idaho, Montana, Nevada, Oregon, and Washington, so out west. A lot of your crop irrigation agriculture is in the Midwest, the Great Plains, and then further points east. So basically western Nebraska, corn-growing regions, western Kansas, and out into Colorado, all the way back through about western Indiana is where the irrigation stops. That is a wide swath. If this opinion spreads across the country, and say the 8th Circuit picks it up, that's Nebraska, that's Iowa, that's a lot of the states in the Midwest. If the 10th Circuit picks it up, that's going to be Colorado and Kansas, for example. This is a real concern to any farmer that irrigates, because your exemption for return flows from irrigated agriculture will then basically be voided, and we're going to have corrective legislation to fix this. So now this is just kind of the opening shot on this. This is something we'd feared for 25 years, and of course it's the Ninth Circuit that gave it to us. So I would encourage any farmer that irrigates crops to go to my blog and read today's post.
And by the way, you touched upon it there. A simple rewrite of the language would basically correct this, do you think?
Well, if they just change the word entirely to majority, then that largely solves the problem. But the other problem is we've seen how contentious opening up the Clean Water Act might be, given just the attempt to change by regulation the definition of a WOTUS and getting that WOTUS rule changed. How that lit a tremendous political fire for the last 2 or 3 years just on that issue. It's not going to be an easy thing just to go in and change one word in the statute. There's a whole lot of politics that are going to get involved.
Well, it's a read worth taking in on Roger's blog. That is Irrigation Return Flows and the Clean Water Act by title. washburnlaw.edu/WALTR is where you'll find that blog. Roger, as always, many thanks for letting us know about this.
Thank you, Eric.
Roger McEowen is a professor of agricultural law and taxation at the Washburn University School of Law, and our guest every other Wednesday here on Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128+ people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local Extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Welcome back to Agriculture Today. I'm Britton Rucker. The 2019 growing season presented many weather-related challenges to producers in Kansas and to neighboring states. In response to these challenges, the focus of the 2019 K-State Agronomy Fall Field Day is titled Building Resiliency in Agronomy. The field day is set to kick off this Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. at the Agronomy North Farm in Manhattan. With me now is K-State agronomist Dorivar Ruiz-Diaz. Welcome.
Thank you.
Now, this field day will dive deep into different agronomy practices and technologies that can aid producers.
Yes, and like you mentioned, we did have quite of a challenge, weather conditions this year in particular, and this year we'll focus a little bit more on building resilient cropping systems, essentially research that's going on in the department looking at cropping systems that will tolerate more extreme weather conditions, higher temperatures, lower temperatures, and in some cases, and essentially looking at from different aspects, not just developing new genetics, but also what happening in terms of applied agronomy, for example, looking at soil systems. What can we do in terms of soil management? What can we do in terms of precision agriculture and so on to, again, manage and improve productivity overall.
So what all topics will be discussed during this field day?
Yes, some of the key topics we'll discuss at this field day will focus, again, kind of start overview of research going on in the department, looking at soil conservation practices, and this is essentially looking at practices such as no-till systems, cover crops, soil health overall, again, as we are trying to develop soils that will provide more nutrients and again, just more resilient soils for production in general. So that will be kind of the first stop in the field day. And then we're going to be looking at a couple crops in terms of genetics improvements that we are doing in the department. Wheat, of course, is a big crop for us, and so we do have a very strong breeding program in genetics, and so we'll be talking about advancements in genetics in wheat at K-State. Dr. Alan Fix is going to be discussing his program in this stop. And then we also do have a strong program going on in sorghum genetics. And again, this basically goes all the way from developing traits, essentially, to developing varieties that will be useful for farmers. And Dr. Jeff Morris is going to be discussing his program on this topic. And then we do have the other half of the program basically focus a little bit more on more applied agronomy, specifically looking at corn and soybean production. We'll focus a lot on corn and soybean, and especially managing variability in the field and how we can essentially increase corn and soybean productivity, managing soil variability, yields, yield potential, and just management in general using precision agriculture technology. And Dr. Ignacio Ciampitian is going to be providing some update on his work in this area, again, with focus on corn and soybean production. And then we also do have very interesting work going on crop physiology, and this really involves all the main crop for us, wheat, corn, soybean, and sorghum. Dr. Krishna is going to be talking about his program and work going on in terms of developing genetics that will be more tolerant to higher temperatures and as well as lower temperature, a little bit kind of those extreme as we are, again, for example, trying to increase productivity. Do we have the possibility of planting earlier, for example, for some of the cover crops? And on the other extreme, can we improve the heat tolerance of the winter crops, in this case for wheat? And so, again, very interesting work there. And so we'll visit a little bit about that project in particular. And then one strong component going on in the department focus on climate and the Mesonet project. And this is specifically focusing, of course, on useful weather data that we can use for crop production. So Chip Redmond is going to be discussing the efforts of the department in this area. Again, we are increasing significantly our network of Mesonet station in the state. And again, that's going to give us an overview of what's happening and how we can use this data to, again, improve crop productivity in different parts of the state.
So where can individuals go to register for this event?
Yes, right now, probably the easiest way to do that will be to go to the K-State Department of Agronomy main page. Just getting in that main page, you will see a link in the main page that will take you to a website where you can register. This is free, open to the public, so anyone can register. We just need that registration so we can count the numbers for lunch. We're going to have lunch at the end of the field day, so we just need that number for that reason.
And once again, it's hosted here at the North Farm Field.
Yes. Yes, it will be here in Manhattan in the North Farm across from the football stadium. Registration will start at 9 a.m. on Friday, September 20th. And the actual program will start at 9:30, and again, we'll finish with lunch at noon. I also like to acknowledge the support from our sponsors. We do have a lot of this work is going on thanks to the support of our crop commissions, and so we do have that support. The corn, soybean, and wheat commissions are providing support, and we really appreciate that.
Well, Dorivar, this field day really has some tools a lot of producers can take back home and make improvements to their operation. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much.
That was Dorivar Ruiz-Diaz, K-State agronomist, discussing the 2019 K-State Agronomy Fall Field Day set for this Friday in Manhattan. Once again, you can learn more about this event by visiting agronomy.ksu.edu. For Agriculture Today, I'm Britton Rucker.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen.
Last evening, Anneke, my wife, and I watched a spider weave its web while sitting on the bench.
That's Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
My daughter Johanna said that they had cleaned spider webs from around their house. It's part of fall upkeep and cleaning. It's a job. I too have noticed spider webs around the house, especially in corners where it is easy to attach the main threads which hold the more intricate web. There's a big one near the front steps. I've been trying to avoid it because of the way it displays itself against the sky. It's several feet across, and the big fat spider waits patiently in the center, ready to quickly walk to whatever corner there's trembling, indicating a captured insect. I noticed the other morning a big insect got caught and now was securely held by the web. I felt sorry for it. Having left the spider web to be admired, I do agree with my daughter that sooner rather than later I will have to get the long-handled broom and start cleaning the cobwebs, or our home will start to look like the residence of Rip Van Winkle. I read recently that there are 2,500 different kinds of spiders on the North American continent. I was reminded of that fact as I carefully negotiated my way around the large spider web which blocked my way, which reminds me that a garden is not a place of only trees, shrubs and flowers, but a real garden is also a place where all kinds of other creatures live, including spiders. Spiders can be fascinating. They're not an insect. Insects have 3 readily visible body parts and 6 legs, whereas spiders have only 2 recognizable body parts and 8 legs. The next time you see a daddy longlegs, count his legs, and you'll see 8 legs. Near the end of the summer, the spiders, that is those which weave webs, seem to be more common. I think that's because we see their webs early in the morning with a few dewdrops sparkling along the thin threads. The most common web in the garden is that from the garden spider, easily recognizable with its yellow and black body. The garden spider belongs to the orb weavers, that is those that weave in circles. When the spider weaves its web, A sticky liquid is provided by the glands in the spider's abdomen and is passed through the spinnerets near the tip of the abdomen. When the liquid comes in contact with the air, it solidifies and becomes a thread. The spider twists several threads together to make a stronger cord. When building its web, it first makes the frame and follows up by filling in with cross threads. If you ever notice a spider at work, take the time to watch it work diligently. Admittedly, it's working for a meal, and for an insect to be caught is no fun, but such is life. I must admit that I have rescued insects from spider's web when the insect was just caught and was frantically fighting to get loose from the threads, sticky threads, which held it. I could see the spider deliberately move to its prey to sting it or encapsule it. As I said, I've gingerly loosened the prey and set it free, all the while apologizing to Mr. Spider for the gross injustice I was doing to him or her. But it made me feel better, just a small act to upset the balance of nature. Talking about the balance of nature, garden spiders do consume huge amounts of garden insects, including pesky mosquitoes. As I bent down to pass under the large web, I must have touched a strand, because I saw the large spider web move and sway. You may have noticed the elaborate webs of the common garden spider have some parts that are highly visible, and it could be said to defeat the purpose of catching the unaware insect. The zigzag strands, which are clearly visible, is extra work for the busy spider and actually could be a detriment or a warning to insects flying by. It has been suggested that the visible zigzag pattern is a warning to other animals, including flying birds, to warn them so that they may divert their flight pattern and in doing so save the web from instant destruction. I first saw the web because of the dewdrops flickering in the morning sunlight. Had I not seen that, I would have walked the path as always. Only when the sticky threads crossed my face would I have known, resulting in wiping, blowing, and shaking my head. Phew! As you move around your yard, look out for this attractive and very useful spider. To create for garden spiders, you must plan for openings, small, intimate openings where spiders can expect to catch insects and where they can find branches of trees or shrubs to attach their strands for the framework of their web. When you see a web, don't just barge through it. Try to avoid it. Even though spiders may weave a new web every day, it's still a lot of work and does take energy for a spider to build a web. It has been estimated that each year the world's spider population eats enough insects to outweigh our entire human population. That is a lot of insects. All the mosquitoes my spiders do catch are a few less to sting me. More power to the spider.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas. That'll do it for today's edition. As always, thanks for tuning in. For Britton Rucker, Eric Atkinson here, this has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.